one of the underlying questions that we like to explore in class is around this idea of if something is legal, does it always make it right to do it, or does it make it ethical to do that? So keeping that in mind, we want to think about algorithmic trading or electronic trading and its utility.
Yeah, so several weeks, I'll come straight out and say I'm not a finance guy, I'm certainly not a technologist, and so I don't know a lot about this. And but I was speaking to a friend of mine recently. He's a programmer, but he's in finance, very common here in Hong Kong. And he was talking about high-frequency trading, algorithmic trading, right? These types of hot new fintech tools that have been utilized really around the world, but especially in a place like Hong Kong. And so as I was learning more about what he was doing and specifically how the technology worked, I had a very, I guess I thought, simple question for him. And my question was, do you think what you do adds value to society, right? And his response was immediate, and he said, no. If you mean in terms of like social value, no, right? To him, it was just a job, and it was a way to make money. And so there's not necessarily inherently anything wrong with that. But I think this is an interesting question. If we use this as an example in the finance space, in the technology space, just because algorithmic or high-frequency trading is legal, does that mean that we should value it? And if so, does it mean that we should even allow it in society?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question in a lot of ways. I mean, on one hand, what's happened perhaps like the last 10 years or so, roughly the last decade, is a move for particularly a lot of what's considered vanilla trading. So like things that are traded that are pretty standard, like just stocks, normal stocks and bonds, nothing fancy. A lot of that has been pushed into these areas of electronic trading, high frequency trading, algorithmic trading, and basically, depending on the strategy, it's just being done by computers and machines effectively. Yeah. And we find, generally speaking, that that is more efficient, right? And so on that hand, you can think like, okay, well, is that better? Yeah. Well, in some respects, that may be better for a client, right? You get better execution. It's probably faster. It's less biased. But in the overall grand scheme of things, so your buddy that's creating this, is he adding societal value? I can see where that jump is really difficult. I think if you take a really big step back and think of it from a macro perspective, yeah, there could be some societal value in someone creating such programs. I mean, for example, most large companies as well as countries in the world have underfunded pensions, for example. And basically, they have obligations they need to pay out at a certain point that they won't be able to because there's a shortfall. And as a result, what a lot of these places end up doing is giving money to other, basically investors, to manage for them to hopefully make enough money where they can pay out, money to you and me when we retire.
Right.
And one of the benefits perhaps would be through more efficient trading, through electronic trading, algorithmic trading, that maybe these people end up getting slightly better returns, which ends up maybe serving, being able to help retirees get their full pension in 50 years. And that's really big picture though, right? I mean, and that's kind of multi-step removed from what your buddy is doing. And so in the context of that, it's a really difficult thing to think about, right? But on the flip side of that, this is not uncommon for a lot of people to think about in general either, right? So if we think about the person who works at a fast food restaurant, maybe serving unhealthy food, when you think about like, is that adding societal value?
You got to eat.
You
don't have to have an algorithmic trade.
Well, that's right. But you need to eat there rather, right? And so like this, So this thinking is, through that. I mean, it just becomes quite interesting.
This is at the heart of the question. And I think this is really what we're asking for you to think about out there is, okay, so you may have differing degrees of restaurants, and there may be differing degree in terms of the health of a food. But at the end of the day, you have to eat, right? And so therefore, at least you're arguing within a specific confined space of something that is a core need, and therefore we as society would value that enough to allow incorporation of that particular type of business enterprise. The question that I'm asking is, and I think what we're trying to get at the heart of, especially from the finance standpoint, is, does finance matter? And if not, if there's a source of, if there's a part of this industry, like algorithmic trading, that doesn't have some inherent value to society, should that be something that we as society allow? And is that something that we should ascribe value to? So again, the question that we asked was, if just because it's legal, that doesn't mean it's ethical, right? And so
or even necessary.
Or even necessary, right? And so, I have this with my students all the time. They'll say, but Mr. Bishop, it's not illegal, right? So who cares? Mr. Bishop, it's not illegal, so therefore it must be okay.
Yeah.
And I
Which
think
are not the same thing.
they're not the same thing. And I think it's a very dangerous kind of mindset that you do see quite prevalently in the finance space that does have me question whether or not we as society are valuing finance correctly, accurately, and whether or not from a regulatory standpoint or from an academic kind of education standpoint, whether or not we're setting them up to view their role and responsibility to society accurately and effectively, right?